Good afternoon. My name is Maddie Lottiehoff, and I am a junior in entrepreneurship and Spanish. I have my own company, Dancing with Miss Maddie, and I am a member of the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Academy in the College of LAS and a member of the Entrepreneurship Club. I am also a very proud recipient of the newly established Keith and Cynthia Kreuer Entrepreneurship Scholarship, for which I am deeply grateful. Thank you for attending the 2022 Reiman Entrepreneur Speaker Series event today. This program is entirely possible due to the generosity of Roy and Bobby Reiman, who know there is value in learning about entrepreneurship from those who have already walked the path. The Papa John Center for Entrepreneurship and those of us representing the entrepreneurial student body at Iowa State University welcome you to today's luncheon and talk. We hope you enjoy the presentation, and if you do, please take a couple of minutes after the presentation to write a thank you note to Roy and Bobby Reiman, who could not be here today but would appreciate knowing that you enjoyed the program. You will find the thank you notes on your table where you can share a message that will be passed along to the Reimans. Thank you, and now I'd like to introduce Chris James.
Thank you, Maddie. And hello, everyone. My name is Chris James, and I am a junior studying entrepreneurship in the Ivy College of Business. I was a member of the 2017 cohort of SciStarters, where I founded True 360, a company that captures virtual reality experiences of zoo animals, sports, and events. I am pleased to have the opportunity to introduce today's speaker, Keith Kreuer. Mr. Kreuer is an active angel investor in the Houston and Austin, Texas startup ecosystems. Having participated in over 100 private investments, he advises startups in Texas and here in Ames through the ISU Startup Factory and the Venture Mentor Service Program. Mr. Kreuer is a native of Jewell, Iowa, just north of Ames, and graduated from Iowa State University with a bachelor's degree in business administration with an emphasis in computer science. Mr. Kreuer founded and serves as a principal in the angel investment firm RedHouse Associates, which operates in Houston, Texas. In his past roles as co-founder or investor, he has assisted companies in achieving a dozen positive exits with returns over $1.5 billion in value to their founders and investors. Mr. Kreuer has been an actively engaged alum of Iowa State, getting involved in programs like SciStarters and the Startup Factory, offering educational sessions and mentoring or coaching. I've had the privilege of being a part of both SciStarters and the Startup Factory, and have had the pleasure of being coached by Mr. Kreuer. He helped me prepare for my pitch in front of VentureNet Iowa, which landed True 360 a six-figure investment. Most recently, Keith and his wife Cynthia established the Keith and Cynthia Kreuer Entrepreneur Tuition Scholarship Program in the Ivy College of Business. Mr. Kreuer is here today to share his journey as a startup founder, someone who mentors startups, and now running a company that invests in startups. Keith will share a few tips from the trenches in his presentation today. Thank you for being here, Keith. And everyone, please welcome Keith Kreuer.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. So I was asking Judy what she wanted me to talk about at this, and she says, well, let's go over some of the background and kind of talk about how you got from Iowa State to what you're doing today. Chris already gave you most of that, so we can skip about 5 slides. But I'm a farm boy. I grew up in Jewell, and, I went to South Hamilton High School, and we were always in Ames anyway, so it was inevitable that I was going to come to Iowa State. And I originally came here thinking I wanted to be an engineer. And I took a few engineering classes and realized that, maybe this wasn't really my passion. And I tripped across my first computer science course in Fortran. And it was really interesting. I loved it. It was very different than anything I had ever done before. And between that and then when I shifted over to the business administration, in those days it was industrial administration degree, I thought, how can I meld these two? Because there really wasn't a minor or anything in there. And management information systems was just starting my senior year. So I had the opportunity to take a couple classes in that, and that really started my journey into the next phases. So I leave Iowa State. I did what every grad in those days wanted. I needed a job at a big company. So I ended up at the biggest company in the world at the time, Exxon. And I was a software developer. Over my 5 years there, I went into project management, did a lot of design work. Our clients in those days, we called them, were really the business side of Exxon, and I happened to be in the marketing organization. So I got a lot of experience in distribution systems, transferring information across the country quickly, putting it into, in those days, mini computers and mainframes. And it sort of evolved me into the next stage that I left and went to Arthur Young, which became Ernst & Young, and I learned how to design systems. So my goal at the time was, okay, what can I do with this? I had this nagging thing. I wanted to start my own company and didn't know how to do it. So I met a couple of my buddies, and we ended up co-founding a company called Penta. Penta was a software development firm. There was no commercialized software back in the late 80s and the early 90s. So what we would do is what I had just learned. Go out, talk to companies, design something they needed, whether it was an inventory system or an add-on to their accounting system. The software was pretty rudimentary back in those days. But we started building all these things. And then not having any entrepreneurial background, we tripped across what ended up starting Penta Safe, which was a software tech company that focused on audit and security software. The computer systems we were working with didn't have a lot of features they needed to protect the users. So we found all these holes and we started writing code to it. So we built that company up, I brought my current partner in RedHouse, Doug Irwin, in to run the company. We learned how to big companies. And from there, it was just a series of things. We sold PentaSafe in 2002. I sold the original Penta company to another company called Vericenter. That resold a few years later. And these deals and both of them were over $200 million each. So it sort of ignited us to our next phase, which was become an angel investor. And since then, we've had a number of investments. I've just picked a few here, but I've had an opportunity to invest in probably 90 smaller deals in addition to some of the big things we've done, as well as participating as an investor in lots of different funds. So much of what I do now is working with the funds to do that. All this just to give you a background to how we got to RedHouse. And what we do there is we don't have a fund. We group our investments. My partner Doug Irwin and I work with some other investors that have followed us literally all the way back to the beginning. And we'll get in companies very early on and help them grow, either from their business plan or all the way up to what we think we can get to an exit. So we don't charge them anything for this. What we want is equity. So not only are we angel investors and putting early money into these companies, we're also getting equity on the same side of the table as the founders, which puts us in a very interesting place because at that point, whenever we're looking at that next stage, we're trying to do what's best for the company and the long-term opportunity of the company. So it sort of tampers both sides, being a founder as well as being a greedy investor. Chris mentioned that essentially we've done a lot of different deals. We've been part of a dozen pretty good exits. And the idea is that we want to leverage these things to work with the community as well as sort of build the base in Houston. I do a lot in Houston and Austin. Austin just caught fire the last few years, primarily with sort of the tech ecosystem that's been built there. Houston's been, looks like a little slow to adopt, but when you're looking at a city of millions of people, and in the area there's 8 million people, we have 100 miles in every direction of multi-lane freeway. Tech is finally getting up a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and how the universities participate in that. What I do in my spare time is I spend a lot of time at Rice, the University of Houston. We have a number of different accelerator programs that have started and merged into others over the years. The biggest thing right now is the ION, which is in Houston Midtown, which Rice sort of created, and now the whole community participates in. But that's just one geographic area within the Houston system. So there's many others all around there that we work with. And one of the groups that's spent a lot of time with that is the Capital Factory. They're out of Austin, and Josh Baer, who started that, literally has hundreds of investments in all the tech companies that are coming to Texas, and now including quite a few companies that have moved from the West Coast. So they're finding that Houston's business climate is working pretty well in that world, just because of low taxes. Pretty much you can do whatever you want without a whole lot of interference. So the Houston and Austin and Dallas as a whole have been really gaining a lot of large companies recently. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I'm on the board of Goodwill Houston as well as Lemonade Day. Everybody knows about Goodwill from the stores, standpoint. You donate goods. What a lot of people don't realize is the mission of Goodwill is not to sell clothing. That's the money that is used to get people jobs. They focus on people with disabilities, ex-military, people who've been incarcerated, people who just have challenges on finding a job and getting them in that position to be successful. Lemonade Day is all about teaching kids how to be entrepreneurs by building a lemonade stand. And over the last few years, we've had hundreds of thousands of kids that have participated in these programs, and I've been helping them work through building an app that would do that. You can download it on the app stores if you want. But it's really designed to take kids through this whole process of building a business plan. And they do that with the culmination of the stand. But I almost want to take my founding CEOs through this, because a lot of them need this background, because it's everything that the schools are teaching, just in a different way with, fun characters and stuff. So maybe that's something Iowa State can do too. And that brought me here. So about 3 years ago, through the business school and the Alumni Association, Brent Bloom came down to Houston, called me up and said, hey, I'm going down through my list of alumni down here, can I meet with you? And when he found out sort of my background, what was happening on campus, he says, you need to come up and see what we're doing. So I know you've been involved with Rice and U of H, but Iowa State's doing a lot of these same things too. So I flew up in February of 2020. And we remember it mainly because it was 2 weeks before the world shut down, basically, with COVID. So I was on campus, I don't know how many classes, I think I talked to 5 different classes, and I was really impressed with everything that was happening here and how it was mimicking many of the communities across the country. So I was all in. I said, all right, well, let's figure it out after COVID dies. I participated in a number of Zoom sessions with various things, but I think this is my 5th trip now back since then. So I've been very happy to participate. And I hadn't been on campus for 39 years. So I noticed there's a few different changes that first trip, and I continue to see things as they occur. Little things like the logo. So this was the logo of Iowa State back in '78. This was what was on side the football helmets. And I do like sort of the clean look of the new things. Psi has changed quite a bit. So I remember, our side back in those days was doing the push-ups after the touchdowns, and I knew one of the guys that wore that one year, and he would train literally wearing a cardboard box to figure out he can do that, and then he had to do the one-handed ones. So I do think the new Psi is much more athletic, looks good, it's modern. I got to tell you, the teeth kind of freaked me out a little bit, though. But overall, I think it's a good change. And I lived in Friley Hall, and I swear it hasn't changed a bit. I know they've done some things internally. Brent took me over there one trip, and they had done some remodeling. I was actually an RA there, and I might have changed a little bit. But this was the RA staff of Friley Hall. You can see that we were heavily influenced in the late 70s by John Travolta and all the disco dancing. So I don't think there's been that many 3-piece suits in one spot since then. So what I really want to do is talk about sort of the changes in entrepreneurship. I mean, basically, when I'm putting this slide together, there was no entrepreneurship. Nothing that I learned at Iowa State or any other university at the time would teach these concepts. Again, we were trying to get a job at a big company, and the whole concept of starting something new, although it was really interesting, I had no idea what I would do. So there was no education, there was no community assistance or anything. There's no investment dollars. In fact, our first companies we started, we didn't even think about that as an option because we didn't know how to start. First bank I went to, I had a business plan and everything, and they looked at me like, well, fine, but you don't have any assets. So we can't give you that $1,000 to buy a copy machine and do other things. It just didn't exist. So the big change now that's happening all over the country are these obvious things. We've got education and community. So now the question is, what are you going to do with it? So the reason I think entrepreneurship is important is that I think finally, so I had a lot of great instructors and professors when I was at school. The only ones that I really remember vividly were more experiential. One of the classes I took, public speaking, we were all terrified of that instructor. But it forced us to get up and talk in front of people. It was experiential. You not only learned the concept, but you did it. And that's what entrepreneurship does. That's why I like going and participating in all these different programs, because it's forcing the students to get up and actually do what they're learning. I don't think my accounting classes or my marketing courses did much of that back in those days. So when I got out into the real world, I had to really learn all of it then. What I'm finding with entrepreneurship students, it doesn't matter whether they go and start a company. In fact, I would encourage most of them not to start a company right away. Go out and learn something, find a niche that you're passionate about, learn something, find a problem you want to solve, make that your life work, then start a company. But with this background, you're learning a lot of things that apply to everything you're doing. We've been talking about corporate entrepreneurship. That's the big hot thing down in Houston right now. All the big oil companies, whether it be Exxon, Shell, and everybody else, they have big groups that are doing the entrepreneurship internally, and they're mixing with the community. Big change. It used to be they were siloed and didn't want to talk to anybody, let anyone know what they were doing because it was special. Now they're all collaborating together. It's more of a sort of a co-opetition type thing. But they're also finding the value of young tech startups that are all ingrained in solving a specific problem, whether it's energy related or not, and then being able to bring that in. So this idea of growing everything at home has really changed, and they're not doing that anymore. Keeping talent in the community is very important, and that's what Houston and other communities are trying to solve right now. So I know the talk here is to talk about tips from the trenches. We were trying to figure out what kind of snazzy title to use for that. I'm going to talk about things that I've learned over the years. There's nothing that I'm going to say that's going to be brand new and innovative. It's just that I've experienced all this stuff, and I'm seeing it day to day, not only in the past, but now, and I'm seeing changes as they occur. So there's going to be a bunch of slides here talking about various type things. This slide contains the only thing you really need to know. And for those of you that when that panel this morning, I brought this up. There's only two things that you need to do to make your startup successful. Find a problem and solve it, and then make a profit. Meaning you've got to find customers that are willing to pay to buy your product or service. I run into many, many pitches that don't do either. They might have a solution. They've got some great technology that they've created, and they're trying to figure out what problem to solve. There are very few companies actually make it that start out that way. So it's much easier to say, okay, this industry, this city, this group has this specific problem that nobody's able to do it right. There might be lots of solutions, but based on, my background and my understanding, I figured out a better mousetrap. So start with that. The next thing is figure out, it's got to be something that they're going to pay for it, and that you can build a company around it. That's the only way to happen. Now, I've built companies that we've sold, one for $250 million. We never made a profit. We were growth when we were very good at building our business plans and forecasting where we were going to be from a revenue standpoint, customer acquisition, cost structure, and everything else. So the VCs kept funding us. So eventually someone bought us because we fit in real well with their needs, but we never made a profit. I'm not suggesting you build a company that way anymore. In fact, right now with the economic world, what's happening with the markets and everything, I would suggest you hunker down for a while. But these are the 2 points. So what should you focus on? I know there's lots of details. So I want to talk of these areas and kind of explain how I see it and what I think that you should focus on. And we always start with founders. So I'm an investor. I typically look at the founders and the problem to start. But if I'm a founder today, I want to make sure that, I have the passion to go into this. I think one of the challenges with all the entrepreneurship education and what we're doing, we've sort of made entrepreneurship cool. And there's a lot of people that are getting into it, not really understanding how hard it's going to be. And you can tell people it's going to be hard. It's like telling people, explain to someone what it's like being a parent. Until you've experienced, you have no idea. I mean, you've read everything, you kind of know, but you just don't know. And it's a lot of time it's just a cold wake up for a lot of, especially my younger founders, when they get them. Many of them tend to be great engineers, scientists, doctors, and going into this world is very different for them because they've always been, brought into the world. They had full control over what they were doing. They knew what to expect. And now starting a company, all these other facets come in and it's very difficult. So we had a discussion this morning. One of the questions was coachability. We're looking for founders that are open to new ideas and that will take criticism and take new ways of doing things and apply it to what they're doing. And in fact, my partner Doug, he calls people in the middle of the night, and he's expecting the founders to take that call. So that's part of that tenacity and grit, that we're hoping for. Not everybody wants that or fits into that role. So, if you're going to step into this world, you better be able to do it and better be prepared for it. We've had a number of founders just quit. I've had a really bad track record with startups started by MBA students. They had brilliant ideas, but the challenge is they also had a big bill to pay. They had $100,000 or more in debt for their MBA program, and going into something where they weren't going to make any money for a long time was really tough, especially if they had families. So working through that, we had one company in particular, they were just on the cusp. They had kind of gone through the early startup things and they were just ready to make it. And between the family issues and the debt it just broke them. That and the fact that he had started off as a medical sales rep, and now he had rep companies calling him and whispering, you can make $300,000 a year if you join us. So that's what he did. He quit the company and it collapsed, and then he's now making a very good wage as a medical sales rep. But I think ultimately he's missed out on potentially millions of dollars in a successful startup. So you got to be careful how you're thinking about that. Compensation is another thing. This touches on what I was just talking about. We don't pay a lot to our founders in the beginning, especially even if we come in later and we're putting money in the company. We really taper down the cash comp. We pay a lot on any type of commission-based, where, okay, well, if we close these deals, now you can get a piece of that. Or developers, if you develop the software and it sells, you'll get a piece of that. So we do a lot of deals like that. But we're not expecting to pay a lot for the founders initially. What we want to have a lot of stock And typically, the founders will have a lot of stock in the beginning, although I've seen a trend over the last few years. Well, even that might be kind of pulled back and put in, and now you've got to kind of work your way into it, just like you do stock options. So that's happened quite a bit. But we really want the equity piece to be the big carrot that our founders are going to do. Otherwise, they're not going to make the company successful just because it's so hard. So we try to align everybody. That's why RedHouse, when we come in and work with a company, we want equity because it's a benefit to the company. It aligns our goals the same way. We want to have some type of exit at the end or some advantage or an IPO or something that we've grown something. Same way with the team. So what I found in hiring team, I mean, you're going to hear lots of tips, hire the best, I agree with all that. But hiring your team is based on the stage of the company. Early on, you want someone who can wear lots of hats. You want somebody that can kind of grow with you, almost like a family. And, and there's a lot of people out there that are, especially now, that are excited about working it up in a startup environment. They may not be able to scale as the company grows, but you want to make sure that you hire people at the right stage. The biggest mistakes I've made in hiring is when I brought someone from like a corporate culture in. We hired at one time, our consulting company was working on an IBM mini computer platform called the iSeries. And we ended up hiring from IBM the top guy in the region that was behind that. And we thought he could walk us into every IBM customer in the entire Southwest. Well, unfortunately, once he got out without that IBM logo, the very first time he walked into an account and he didn't have that behind him, he sort of cratered to the point where he didn't want to go out. And without that backing of that big corporate culture, it just didn't work. So we made a huge mistake. We hired someone that was much farther along in a big company than what we needed or wanted at the time. We just didn't know it. So I think after a few years, once our company grew, if we hired him at that time, it would have been much more successful. But it wasn't a good fit for either of us. So he ended up going back to another larger company, and they grew, and he did very well eventually. And then we ended up selling ours too. So it kind of worked out for all of us. But growth stage is really important when you're looking at these type of things. Skills and abilities is sort of self-understanding. You do want to hire the best people you can find. I don't really have as big a problem with most of our founders. They tend to want to hire the best, and the good ones don't. There's no challenge with hiring someone that might take your job in a startup. I find that more in a corporate environment where there might be a limitation. People will be reluctant to hire someone that might be better than them. In the startups, we're always pushing that mantra. And then the same way with compensation, we want success bonuses and things. Everything's geared to building and growing the company. And when we do have someone who comes in and they want something that just doesn't fit where we're at from a compensation standpoint, it's kind of that clear sign that says, okay, well, this isn't going to work out. But we'll keep that information for maybe later, because maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, it will work. Product and competition, this is huge. Like I said, it's the team and the product. What problem do you solve? So what we want to do is really focus on what that product is, who's going to pay for it, what's the competition. So I do find that a lot of our early startups, if they're engineers as the founding team, they don't do enough research. They don't go out and find out who all the competition is. They know what's sort of in their niche, but they don't really look outside of that. So what we do is we push a lot of these things, making sure they understand who the competitors are, who's coming on the horizon. Many times they're building a solution that's going to match up against sort of the tried and true leaders of the industry, and they don't look to see who like them is coming up behind them. So part of when I go to lots of events and conferences is I'm trying to figure out who's going to compete with our companies. So I'm maybe going around shaking hands and talking to everybody, and luckily I'm an investor, so everybody wants to talk to us. But I'm just trying to figure out what they're doing and how we compete. So if you're a founder in the room and you're doing that, keep your eyes open all the time for someone. Make sure they're not taking information for somewhere else. I mean, this is a slide we could go on for a whole session alone. Same with market size. The only reason I put this in here is you don't have to change the world. Now, if I was in the West Coast, they'd be arguing with me on this. All the investors say, no, we want big deals that change the world. I think you can do really well as a founder, building a company, and being an investor if you're looking for incremental improvements. It's not the sexy thing, but it works. You can build huge companies just on incremental improvements. And you don't necessarily have to have, these markets of $10 billion, $100 billion. You can find something that makes sense in your environment. The other thing, the throttling point is how much money do you want to raise? So if you want to raise a lot of money, you're going to have a big market. But if you think you have a niche where you can build a company and a team and solve a problem within a smaller market, don't raise a lot of money. Just be scrappy, bootstrap it. It'll work. Go-to-market strategy is another very long presentation we talk about, but I want to just talk about sort of the process of building, particularly in the tech world, and the metrics that we need to look at today. I'm an advocate of the lean startup approach. I pitch it. I've learned it. It's a very easy concept for a lot of tech companies to understand. The problem is that I think there's a challenge that we take it too far. This whole idea of pivot early and fail fast ends up sometimes being, we fail fast, we just quit. Or pivot means that, okay, we're not making a slight turn, we're actually throwing the plan out because there never was a plan to begin with. There was just this quick ideas that we're going to learn, build, and measure. So we did a few customer interviews. They all agreed with us. You got to do hundreds and hundreds and try to find, what I challenge our founders to do is go out and find customers that disagree with what you're trying to do. And then you build your product on that. And that's a hard thing to do, particularly with engineers. And then the MVP comes out and it may have great initial traction. So you're getting that feedback that you wanted, but the underlying architecture is not there. So you have to redo the whole thing eventually, and all you've got maybe is the UI, which could be important, but it's really difficult to build the company in that sometimes, and you end up with all this technical debt. And what I mean by technical debt is that now I've got to build all these things that you see behind the scenes that nobody knows about. And we've had a couple companies that had great initial traction, and then we went an entire year without seemingly delivering anything new because the entire development team was building the architecture infrastructure that we should have thought about earlier on, but we were doing this whole lean fast approach. So that's the only thing is, if you're going to take this methodology, just make sure you're not sort of painting yourself in a corner, and it happens all the time. So the business plan is kind of an older concept, but I don't want to see 80-page document. What I want to see is a pitch deck that kind of goes through all the processes. And we don't have time to talk about what the agenda would be in the pitch deck itself. But it all goes back to what the investors want to see. It goes back to what our customer base. You should be able to create a business plan that you can literally do from your one sentence thing we did this morning to a 5-minute on stage pitch competition to a hour-long session with an investor. It should all be the same deck. It just depends how much detail you go through on each one. There might be supplemental materials you put in an appendix, but the format's always the same. The way you describe your business. It makes it really simple for ad hoc meetings. Or someone asks you meet someone. I brought up a thing this morning. I met someone in Uber, my driver the other day, that wanted to be an entrepreneur. So we talked about all this kind of stuff. So for a half hour, I was giving him this pitch. And he was all excited, and it's going to be interesting to see if he ever does anything with it. But The one thing in the business plan you got to figure out, no matter what approach you use, is how do you start and how do you scale? Most of the pitches I see is how you scale. That we're going to be here in 3 or 5 years. You got to take the beach. I had a call with someone that I mentored about 4 years ago, and she was giving me an update on her business, and she says, I told her I was coming here. She says, oh, make sure you tell the founders you got to take the beach. And I forgot I had told her about there. I don't use many military concepts, but at the time for her and her company, I said, look, you gave me a plan that it shows me how to win the war. I don't see how you start. Unless you can get on the beach, you're stuck. So she spent the last couple of years through COVID. It's actually an app that takes your tastes in art and then shows you what things you like. And so her idea is to be able to not only have people define what they want in art, but sell it to galleries, sell it to people who are selling art, and do all these things. So it's an interesting concept, but she had to go back and refigure this. The metrics that are becoming more and more important, we've always talked about the basic business stuff. Cash is king, sales growth, all the different expenses, headcount things, but unit economics, particularly in the tech world, have become really important. And what I mean by that is I've had a lot of companies get started. We had tremendous traction from the beginning, and we lost money on every sale, which is fine in the beginning. But when we figured out, went through the plan long term, we realized we would never make any money on any sale. The product was too expensive. It took too long to install. There were just lots of problems with it. So we had to go back with this unit economic standpoint and say, look, what's the cost to find a customer? What's the cost to build, install, and retain a customer? And then how long can we keep them, which goes into our lifetime value. You got to get to a positive lifetime value. This runs everything. And this is the other thing, this part of that mega profit. Lifetime value of your customer, particularly in the tech world, is the key thing. And it's taken me a few years to figure that part out and have it pounded in like it is now. So now all our financial models, we end with this all the time, and we look at it. We know in the first years we don't hit positive, but we have to at some point. Otherwise, unless you have venture funding continually keeping you alive, you'll never make it. And the world's changed. The venture guys, one, they don't get in early anymore. It's more like private equity. And, people like me, we only have so much money to take you so far. So you've got to figure out a positive value. Product roadmaps are just a way then of doing that to say, look, we've got our initial MVP. We're going to add these things over time to take over the market. So a good product roadmap is not only explains how you're going to build your solutions, but what the timeline is, and then how that will tie back to your financial projections and your funding and everything else. And this started off more as like a tech thing, but it really works for anything. We're working with a company right now that sells steak, Good Ranchers. Look them up because I've got an investment in them. So it's basically selling steak just like Omaha Steak would be one of their key competitors. But they're all about quality. So we're talking them on the product roadmap is, well, what other things do you sell to the same customers? How do you increase the size of your customer base with new product lines? So all of this goes back to a product roadmap and something you wouldn't think would need one. Funding is usually the longest discussion. And all I want to tell you here is bootstrap as long as you can. The days of just taking a PowerPoint presentation and getting funding are kind of long gone. You might be able to find an angel investor that's really interested in what you're doing or likes you and wants to participate. But you really need to get to something that you can show. If you can get bootstrap all the way to a product and a customer, and now you want to expand on that, that's your best way to really have success in the long run. It doesn't mean you're going to have success. It's just a good starting point. And it differentiates you right out of the gate. There's lots of companies. The problem with the cloud and MVPs and all these things is it's really easy for anybody to mimic what you're doing. They tend to be, most MVPs are very broad. They look like they hook to everything, but they're not very deep and can be copied. What you want is something that's going to link into behind the scenes stuff that makes you really sticky and stays. That takes a long time and a lot of expertise to do. So yeah, take the lean approach, get there, but now figure out what your niche is and build those really deep things in that they can't take you out. The only other thing here I want to point out is inflection points. When you raise money, find those points where you can prove your valuations. Everybody wants to talk valuations. That would be a really long talk, by the way. So I suggest that you figure out your funding strategy, and there's going to be multiple of them potentially, is here's our first MVP. We need some funding now to execute, hire more developers, or at least get to the point where we have our customer. If you can get all the way to customer on bootstrapping, great. But now each of these inflection points where on your business plan you've got a discernible difference, you can raise money at those points and show how effectively those funds were used to get a higher valuation later. What typically happens is okay, well, I know I'm going to run out of money here. And when you try to raise it, you can't say why and why it's beneficial right now. So we spend a lot of time with the founders on these inflection points. Exit plan. So if you have an investor involved, we're going to want to figure out how we get paid back. So I think the best thing to do in your company is you build the company for the long term as if it will run forever, but be ready for an exit of some kind. And there are lots of different exits, and I wish we had time to talk through all these. But we've sold companies because of the growth they experienced, and the acquiring firm wanted that growth to be able to show their stockholders. We've done it purely on profitability, where we were so efficient and our margins were so high that the acquiring firm wanted to bring in other companies and do acquisitions and put them in underneath that process. And one of those companies that we had sold for about $200 million, now 8 years later is worth $2.5 billion. And you never heard of it. It's called Idera. It's a little software. I say little. It's a software management tech company. Strategic, where there really was the whatever they were selling was in line with a hole that the acquiring company had. So we've had great success there, and sometimes it was just an execution. Where On It, for instance, which sold a couple of years ago, they're another close to be $1 billion company. They were so good at getting their customers out to companies that the acquiring firms, in this case it was a private equity company, wanted again to use them as a model for a lot of the other companies they were going after. So there's many ways in which the reasons why you will get acquired. You've got to figure out how you fit in, and sometimes you could fit in a couple different ways. But many times it might be someone who you're beating on the market that just wants to take you out. So the question would be will they actually use what they're buying, or does it sort of merge in everything else? That's one of the challenges with tech companies is they get acquired and you never hear of them again, mainly because the tools either go away or they're just sort of put in place with the branding of the occupying firm. Okay, and then final thoughts. I know we're running out of time. This is for the founders in the room. Find out what you're passionate about, and then go find a partner. I've only invested in one deal that had a single founder, and he had already created a successful consulting company with some software he was selling. So he had a team built, and we helped him get to the cloud and bring in external funding and a new management team. So he essentially stepped back from the CEO role, took a role as the CTO, the technical guy, and then learned how to build the company. It sold for about $80 million, and now he took it as CEO and he sold it again for much, much more. In fact, I can't even find out, it's so much. So find a partner that can help you. Part of it is just you need someone to work with, and it's not someone to commiserate with when things are going bad. It's someone to high five with when things are going good. I found I needed my first foray was by myself was terrible. I needed partners. And I've been lucky in that and all the different deals I've been in, I've had great partners all through the whole thing. Forget about work-life balance for a while. This is hard. It's going to take all your time. I know this is not a popular topic, but it's the truth. If you want any kind of balance, go take a corporate job someplace. It's already structured. There's certain times you're supposed to be there and do it. Be an effective startup person, you're not going to have this. I had a discussion with my Uber driver about time. He said, look, I don't have anything. I don't have any money. I said, you got one asset that everybody has in the same amount. He goes, what? He said, time. So what are you doing at night? So, well, my friends and I, we're gamers. So, well, maybe you should take a few of that hours and build it on your podcasts. And he's like a light bulb went off. He goes, wow, I didn't think about it that way. I said, yeah, how are you going to use your time? The most effective entrepreneurs I've met were just crazy at time management. Usually that meant they were always working, had no work-life balance, but they used their time always for the betterment of the company. My partner, Doug, we're involved in all these different deals. The guy doesn't sleep. He's got too much going on in his head all the time. He's the king of time management, I found. And in fact, he used to do talks about breaking the days up when he was a sales manager, how he wanted all his salespeople. You have 10 days in a week, he'd say. You have the morning, the afternoon of every day. So you break it into those things and what activities you're going to focus on. When are you out selling? When you're doing paperwork? So, it's time. And then finally is, you got to have fun at it. That is, at the end of the day, the most important thing about a startup. And this is pictures of when we started. We've had 2 or 3 different companies out of our RedHouse. And, we've had our companies on the name of some very tall buildings. But talking about culture is a very long discussion, but that's what we do. We bring in people at these different stages of the companies, really get them immersed. I mean, when that company, Pensafe, was bought by NetIQ, they referred to all of us as a cult. It was actually, from an employee level, it was a tough merger because they couldn't handle us. We came in sort of fired up, and they were set in their ways. They had a 9-to-5 mentality, and we just shook the whole place up. And over time, it worked out well, but in the beginning, it was really hard. So, how do you want to build something? That's have fun doing it and enjoy it, because really that's what you have. So that's the end of the formal discussion. We have some Q&A. Like I said, I didn't think I was going to tell you anything you haven't heard before.
I'm loud. I don't need a microphone. My name's Doug Moore.
Hey, Doug.
I'm a founder, an entrepreneur, and an investor here in Ames. And I wanted to say hallelujah to everything you just put up there.
Oh, thank you.
Particularly bootstrapping, being poor, working hard. It's going to suck for a long time. But one thing I would like you to comment on, I know you mentioned it briefly. We have seen in the last 2 or 3 years some absolutely insane valuation expectations, which have blown these deals out of the water before they even can get started. I wonder, are we isolated, or is this a problem that you've seen in Houston and in your other
It happens everywhere. I will tell you right now, have you checked valuations recently?
Yeah, and like a stone.
Everything is cratering. And so I think the problem with high valuations, and it's kind of like the economy's been, right? There's if there's an abundance of something, it's the pricing of everything kind of goes whether there's a lot of demand versus what's out there. And when there are a lot of startups, pushing I'm going to have very high valuations, you have to make a decision whether you want to do that or not. And what's happening right now is with the markets changing, there's still a lot of cash in the sideline, but no one's willing to put it in these risky ventures. So a lot of stuff is just plummeting. Part of it was, I think, during COVID, everyone was expecting the world to crater, and it didn't. So I know a lot of my people in my investor areas were giddy about, okay, well, let's keep putting money into things. And we were continuing to fund a lot of our deals through our lines of credit. So we were borrowing money to actually put into deals. Well, now all the rates are going way up, so now that's starting to dry up too. So I think it's going to be a very tough couple of years at least now, from what I'm hearing from everybody. I try not to pay too much attention to it. I'm just focusing on our deals and making sure we've got good companies. But it's going to be hard. So if it's tough as a founder when especially when the younger people, when they're seeing all these great valuations, because you feel, well, I should have that too. And you have to prove your company out that you're worth that valuation. That's a concept that's kind of hard to get in sometimes. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. That's very useful. My question is, how loyal should you be to your team members? Say you have a good advisor. Someday you find another person that's even better.
Yeah.
And that person might be able to replace your advisor. You have a very good CTO, CXO, and then someday you find an even better person who might be willing to replace that person. What do we do?
Yeah, that's a good question. One I've had a hard time with over the years. So when the startup gets going, remember I talked about the stages. You sort of have this family atmosphere and gung-ho attitude and everybody there. But a lot of those people over time may not be able to scale as you get larger, become more specialized and have individual, jobs that are required. And you're going to now attract people because you're farther along that you never could have attracted in the beginning. So I've had to let a lot of people go that were just like family members to me. And what we've done is we've always tried to find them maybe another startup. And I would prepare people saying, look, you hate what's happening right now. There's all these other things going on. Let me introduce you to them. And then eventually we would try to move them over. It doesn't always work. I still have a couple people one woman that was older than us when we first started our first deal. She was our mother. Literally was the company mother. She did the accounting early on before we sort of scaled beyond what she could do. She was the office manager. She knew where, I'd call her up every morning. Okay, I'm here doing this. And when we sold the company, she just hated us, my partner and I, because in her mind, we broke the family apart. And I still feel bad to it. This is now 22 years later. I still feel bad about it, but it had to happen. It was a great next step for all the employees. It's just she was the one person that's just never got over it. So you're always going to have it. In fact, in a kind of an odd way, the more you have it, where you're really great people want to join you and you've got to find a spot for them, it just means you're doing the right things. But the personal side is going to always be tough, no matter what kind of organization you're putting together. Yes.
I'm sure you find it very difficult to get a founder who's passionate and immersed in their business. Is this working? Okay. To understand that you're taking equity coming in. How do you get them to understand that there's going to be eventually an exit strategy when they're just like, oh my gosh, you're going to sell, this is about selling my company? How do you?
Yeah, the best thing I've been able to rely on is I went through all that. And I remember having the conversation with my partner at the time is, what? We're going to bring this guy in and we're giving him what of the company? We've spent 3 years building this. Why? This isn't fair. And we went through all that process. So I use that a lot of times to sit down with the founders as we go through this and show them what the business plan looks like. The other thing I do, not only with the founders, but with employees when we bring in, everybody wants to know, well, what % of the company do I get when I join? What if we have an option pool, what % of the options is this? We get them away from percentage really fast. We say, look, we have X number of shares, and I'm going to give you 2,000 shares, let's say. Today, they're priced at 10 cents. That's, from a valuation standpoint, that's where we're at. Our goal over the next 5 to 7 years is we want this now to be $3, $5 a share. And I can show them the list of those companies and actually show them how those worked and say, that's what we're going to do with you. That's our plan. It may not work, but that's what it is. You have X number of shares at 10 cents today, which is this paper value. We're going to try to build it up to that point. We take the percentage completely out of the conversation. It actually works, especially with people that have been in startups and all they've ever thought about was percentage. You come in and you just talk dollars.
Then you've got to make the point of, okay, it's $5 a share. You've been at this for how many years? Now how do you convince that guy to say, guess what, we're selling this now? And he's going to say, well, wait a minute, I think it could be $10 a share.
Yeah, I get that too.
Yeah, how do you get to that?
Usually it's been such a long, hard, run up the hill that they're ready to. I've had it the other way as well. But that would be a great problem to have too if you were really doing well. Normally I have that more with the investors. That's usually more of an investor discussion than the employees. The employees are quite happy. By the way, we sold one company. The most fun I've ever had is to go down the list and call people to tell them, hey, we're getting ready to sell. You're going to get a letter or an email tomorrow describing this. I'm giving you a heads up. And I'd tell them, you're getting 5 years worth of salary tomorrow. And just the surprise in their face. And so usually the employee side's fine when you have a good outcome. Are we finished?
So,
okay. Yeah. All right. One last thing. It kind of goes with the question here. So this is for the founders. It's going to be very hard. And I've used this on a number of occasions. Just read that. If you're willing to do what's required now, it changes everything later in life. It really does. Everything that I'm doing right now was that 10 years that we always thought we were 2 weeks from bankruptcy. It's true. It works. And I do this a lot of educational sessions just because everyone's so excited about it all. But this is very true. Really work it hard now, and then you get to determine. It's not really a money thing. Everyone thinks it's all about money. It's really about controlling your next steps. The reason I get to spend about 25 to 30% of my time doing this kind of stuff is because of the time I spent early. All right? Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Philip Gorney. I'm a junior in aerospace engineering. I participated in 2022 cohort of SciStarters, and I travel across the country and competing in pitch competitions for my business safety scan. Maybe someday I can participate in the Cover the Rights Business Plan competition. I know Keith takes place in Houston. I want to thank everyone for attending Luncheon today. Please do take a few minutes to complete the thank you cards on table for Mr. and Ms. Reiman. We'll collect them and share them with the Reimans. Mr. Kreuer, thank you again for taking your time to speak at Iowa State University and for the many times you engage with students, founders, and the Iowa State entrepreneurship community. I know I appreciate the coaching and feedback you provided me over the summer. And now I want to present to you a small gift and appreciation for your time. There you go.
All right, thank you.
Many of the items are by Iowa State student entrepreneurs, and they're sold at the Innovate 1858 retail store in the Student Innovation Center. Thank you again for your great talk that's inspired us to keep starting something at Iowa State University.
Thank you very much.
On that note, that concludes our program. Everyone, please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you. And make sure to take action on some of the things that you learned today. I know Mr. Kreuer is going to be staying around for an extra couple minutes if anyone has any questions for him. Thank you, guys.
All right.